Welcome back to the Project Complexity Weighting Knowledge Sharing series. In this section, we will start modeling the application of the theoretical framework we went through in Chapter 2 to a typical real-life project, such as the types of projects any given organization would have to implement to reposition and pivot in the new normal. We'll focus on construct mapping in this section. Let's get going. A reminder of the context again. Let's assume in this case that the general project resources, such as technical business analysts and project managers, all sit in the centralized shared services project office, and the functional specialist resources, such as function-based implementation specialists, all sit within their respective functions, such as finance and human resources. The technology team, with its various technology specialized functions such as enterprise IT, digital platforms, and customer management systems, sits separately within a centralized technology shared services capability node. As intuition would suggest, in this case, the responsibility of project complexity assignment and the overall management of the project portfolio sit with the project office. A recap of the theoretical framework as discussed in Section 1. There's very little that can be done about the organizational structure and its various decision makers and influential players within a project. Those types of decisions happen outside the project office. Since this is an element that hardly ever changes, least so as affected by project office dynamics, it wouldn't typically be an input to the complexity application in the type of context we described. In terms of size, the initial feasibility done before the idea actually becomes an actual project should indicate a ballpark figure. Depending on how organized the business is, this feasibility analysis should happen between the potential project sponsor or owners and the demand management office, if one exists. So the project office would have limited sphere of control over the attribute of project budget as an input. The only attributes of consideration are the potential project duration and work hours, which can be estimated since the complexity calculation happens at the initial stages of a project. The resources construct deals with assessing the availability of resources with the right knowledge, skills, and expertise required to execute the project in question. The availability assessment mainly deals with three aspects: availability within the organization, availability for the specific project as a factor of the demand pipeline, as well as availability in terms of the budget, time, and effort required to source resources externally. The complexity rating should naturally increase as the sourcing moves further away from the immediate resources available to the project office. A lot of projects within an organization tend to be executed by multiple teams, and vendors or partners tend to be a natural and fluid part of those teams, especially if they've been in the environment for quite some time. It can be complicated finding appropriate vendors or partners for a given project, and the process of doing so may add unnecessary complexity and delays to the project. Instead of running the risk of making what should be a value-adding process an encumbrance, It might be a better approach to capture attributes of this construct in the resources construct and rather leave it out of the calculation. System interdependencies are an inherent factor of most digital projects, especially those relating to customer experience improvement involving automation or augmentation of processes. Short engagements with technical teams at feasibility assessment stage, even before putting the project in the portfolio pipeline, should have already yielded enough information to give a weighting on how this element is likely to impact the complexity of the overall project. This is how the organizational complexity construct looks after the construct mapping process for the context described. A recap of the context again. Differentiation requires a lot more effort and analysis than is necessary in the ideation stage of a project. Making assumptions about such a key element of a project may not be such a good idea either. As much as the project office might not necessarily have a say on the project goals, the extent of meeting them is an indicator of whether the project is a success or not. An initial assessment of what would likely be required to meet them would give an indication of the extent to which they are likely to impact the project complexity. Out of all the elements, this is one for which full information is required. There shouldn't even be a conversation about a potential project until this element is clearly defined and laid out. The initial scope in terms of high-level constructs and functions to be covered should be available after a few sessions of ideation and high-level requirements definition to determine the extent to which the scope will impact the complexity of the project.